You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the capture of the ship Nancy on November 29, 1775. As I've mentioned before, General Washington authorized the purchase and conversion of several merchant vessels into lightly armed ships that could stop ships from supplying the British in Boston. One of the ships he acquired for this purpose was a schooner owned by Thomas Stevens in Marblehead, Massachusetts, called the Two Brothers. The Army renamed it the Lee in honor of Major General Charles Lee. Captain John Manley was given command of the Lee. Manley had been born in England. According to some stories, he was the illegitimate son of an English duke. He made a life for himself in Marblehead, eventually serving as a captain of merchant vessels. Manley was serving in the Army as part of John Glover's Marblehead Regiment when he received the appointment to take command of the Lee. His crew of about 50 men came primarily from Glover's regiment, which was made up of men who had worked on ships their whole lives. The British seemed unconcerned about any threats from the Patriots at sea. The British dominated the waters off North America. Authorities saw no need to send transport vessels in convoys protected by British warships. General Friedrich Haldeman, who had just come to London from Boston, assured authorities that there were no American ships who could threaten their shipping. Manley took command of the Lee in late October, flying a new flag with a white background and a New England pine tree over the motto, "An Appeal to Heaven." On November 27th, the Lee captured a small sloop, the Polly, who was bringing supplies to Boston. Polly was filled with turnips. Nothing too exciting there, but more food for the Continental Army and less food for the enemy. That was always a win. 2 days later, on November 29th, the Lee encountered a much larger ship on its way to Boston from London, the 250-ton brigantine Nancy. Because Lee was a much smaller ship, and because they were told there was no maritime threat from the Americans, the British mistook the Lee for a pilot ship. These were ships that would send in crews who were familiar with the local area and could guide the ship into port. Manley sent over a crew in a small boat with their arms concealed under their coats. When they came aboard, they brandished their arms, forcing the small crew of the Nancy to surrender without a fight. After being brought to port at Beverly, the Americans discovered the true value of their prize. The Nancy's cargo included 2,000 muskets, 8,000 fuses, 31 tons of musket balls, 3,000 solid shot for 12-pounder cannonballs, and one 13-inch brass mortar. They also had 100,000 flints and other ammunition and supplies. For the munitions-starved Continental Army, this military equipment was more valuable than gold. It supplied the Army with critical munitions that they needed. A supply train of wagons carried the munitions to Cambridge, where Washington had established his headquarters. The Army celebrated the arrival of desperately needed guns and equipment. Several witnesses reported General Israel Putnam mounting the new mortar with a bottle of rum to christen it. London had provided the Continentals with more arms and equipment than they had received from any other single source up until that time. Captain Manley and the crew of the Lee continued to patrol the waters around Boston, capturing several more supply ships, which provided food, rum, coal, and dry goods for the Continental Army, and of course denying those to the British garrison at Boston. Manley would later be promoted to a larger ship, the Hancock, and he would eventually serve as Commodore of Washington's cruiser fleet. When the Continental Congress was ready to launch its Continental Navy later in 1776, it put together a list of its first Navy captains. Manley was number 2 on that list. Manley would continue to serve as a captain throughout the war, bringing in numerous prizes, and Captain Manley, who brought in the first major prize of the war, also brought in the last one, capturing the Bailey in January of 1783. The United States Navy has named 3 different ships in Manley's honor. The Lee would continue to sail under other captains for another 2 years, capturing another 15 ships before being returned to its owner. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. I originally covered these events in episode 74 of the American Revolution podcast. I also encourage you to subscribe for free on whatever podcast platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.